Welcome to Module 3C of the LRC-South's Inclusive Education Paraprofessional Training Series. This module will focus on the Universal Design for Learning principle of representation. In terms of how this module connects to your roles and responsibilities as a paraprofessional, we know that UDL has implications and applications across all areas of schooling, so the module includes elements that relate to all areas of your role, including how you support students, how you support peer interaction, how you support the active participation of students with disabilities or the direct instruction of students with disabilities, and your collaboration with class teachers. As you learned in Module 3A, UDL is a framework for teaching and learning that relates to designing curriculum and learning environments that plan for learner variability and build in flexibility to reduce barriers and enhance access for all students. The framework is organized around three guiding principles: providing multiple means of engagement, providing multiple means of representation, and providing multiple means of action and expression. In this module, we'll be exploring the representation principle in more detail. As a reminder, your goal is to think about choosing one UDL checkpoint or strategy to focus on bringing into your practice at a time. The UDL guidelines are not prescriptive. They just offer places to start and can help us think differently about education, away from changing the learner in favor of changing the environment. This module will take you through UDL guidelines and checkpoints related to representation. The representation principle connects to the what of learning and aims to ensure that all students can access the materials and the environment. Presenting information and content in different ways helps to support the development of resourceful, knowledgeable learners. The principle can be broken down into three guidelines or areas that you might consider providing more options within: perception, language and symbols, and comprehension. We'll take a look at each. Providing options for perception involves asking, how are students able to interact with the content in ways that don't depend on a single sense? Think back to Module 3A, when we discussed the example of how relying on text-based print materials only, for example, can work for some students and create barriers for others. The key is planning in advance to offer content in a variety of ways, since as we learned in Module 3A, we can anticipate variability in the ways that learners take in and process information. You might consider offering ways of customizing the display of information. This is pretty easy to do when students have access to technology. For instance, when reading a page of text on a laptop, some students might choose to increase the size of the font. Others might choose to increase contrast by switching to dark mode or white text on black background. Other students who have trouble reading or processing text altogether might use text-to-speech access to listen to the content instead. All of these options for customization of content are built into technologies that we use in our classrooms and our personal lives every day. Other areas to consider include offering alternatives for auditory information or content that's delivered by the sound or voice. For example, if students are listening to a teacher's mini lecture, consider activating live captions on a smartboard or providing access to lecture notes or a transcript for students to follow along. Similarly, build in alternatives for visual information or text and images. Think about what you might do if a teacher is relying heavily on text-based or visual materials. Is there an audio version of the book for students to choose? Can there be text-based image descriptions for students to read? These are all examples of how you might add in alternatives and options that plan for the range of different ways that students perceive and access content. So what might this look like? Well, it might involve access to digital texts and audiobooks for all students, text-to-speech software, which, as I mentioned, is often built into technologies we have readily available, using partner reading in classrooms, providing students with copies of slides or lesson materials to follow along and notate or annotate personally, providing caption videos. This is an easy switch to make and include captions on all videos that are shown during class or for assignments, allowing students to control the rate of a video playing or having them slow down or speed up the playback, offering materials in different size fonts, customizing and providing alternatives to content to move beyond requiring that all students rely on the same sense to access materials can take some creativity, intentionality, and collaboration. It can also take some planning. In advance, think about what talents, interests, and experiences do you bring to the classroom that could contribute to providing options for how students interact with content. Next, we'll think about how the principle of representation involves considering providing options for language and symbols, or considering how to make sure that students can participate regardless of their background knowledge or proficiency with language, text, mathematical notations, or symbols. Some key checkpoints to consider in this area include clarifying vocabulary and symbols, or using different ways to represent the key ideas and concepts of material. Clarifying syntax or structure. This can involve, for example, conveying clear expectations around things like grammar or equations. You can consider supporting decoding of text, mathematical notations, and symbols. If the goal is for students to comprehend a story or complete a mathematical equation, make sure that the text or symbols aren't the thing getting in the way of that learning goal. Promoting understanding across languages. You can use translations, descriptions, movement, and images to support learning in unfamiliar or complex languages. Again, these are tech tools that are often built into classrooms these days, or just involve creative use of response mechanisms and representation. You can also illustrate things in multiple ways through multiple media, offering a level of repetition and redundancy in a variety of modes. This really connects to providing options for perception. You can enhance learning, for example, by providing multiple points of access through things like graphics, activities, images, videos, and games. So what might this look like in practice? Here are some examples. You might pre-teach vocabulary before a unit, or develop a glossary of key vocabulary terms that students can reference throughout, so the vocabulary isn't the barrier to students comprehending or accessing the content. You might choose to incorporate images, concrete objects, and symbols alongside key terms to help students connect to these ideas. Or you might commit to always using clear visual and verbal instructions so that students are not always relying on one sense in order to understand the expectations. Now it's your turn to try applying this. Students are learning about the 3 states of matter. What are 2 different ways you could represent the states of matter? The final guideline to consider related to representation is providing options for comprehension. The goal of education is not just to present students with information, but to teach them how to take that information and turn it into knowledge that is useful and relevant to them. Here we have 4 checkpoints to consider in creating opportunities for students to process and understand the information in ways that are useful. You can activate or supply background knowledge. Remember in Module 3A when we discussed how prior knowledge informs how and what students connect with in the learning environment? Planning for the predictable variability in backgrounds can involve building connections to prior understanding and experiences to create learning opportunities that value the uniqueness of learners and their past experiences. You might highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships. Students are often inundated with information throughout the day. Accentuating the key points and explicitly connecting to the learning goals can support their access and comprehension. You might guide information processing and visualization. This can involve providing models, scaffolds, and feedback. And you can work on maximizing the transfer and generalization of knowledge by creating opportunities for students to apply learning across new contexts. Let's take a look at how this looks in practice. Some examples include using graphic organizers, which are templates or tools that tend to break down assignments and organize ideas visually. Here's an example of highlighting key concepts. You might do that, as I have here, by highlighting key ideas or drawing attention to specific images or vocabulary that are particularly important. You might work to chunk content into smaller units that are more manageable for students. You might consider using concept maps that help students visualize the connection between new information and prior knowledge. All of these are examples of strategies that can support students in translating information into usable knowledge and ultimately greater learning. So now it's your turn. Explore the examples of graphic organizers at the link provided here and available in the resources section of the module. Choose one or two to download and save to use with your students. Consider at least one adaptation you could make to the graphic organizer you downloaded that would make it even more relevant and accessible to a student you work with. So let's review. The UDL principle of representation asks that we think about how information is presented to learners. Some key questions to ask yourself include, does the information provide options that can help all learners reach higher levels of comprehension, understand the symbols and expressions being used, perceive or access what needs to be learned? Now that we've reviewed the representation principle, you can take some time to return to the interactive UDL guidelines linked in the slides and the resources, focusing on the representation principle in purple. Your task is to identify one representation checkpoint to focus on implementing in your practice right away. Remember that UDL is a framework that offers starting points and ideas for consideration, and it's best to start with one strategy or area and build up from there. Here we've compiled a set of resources for you, listed and linked on the slide and in the resources section, that offer a range of different ways for you to dive deeper into the representation principle of UDL. You can choose between reading or listening to the linked resource on the use of graphic organizers in inclusive classrooms. You might review the representation in instructional methods examples in this IRIS module, or select a UDL principles and practice video to view. The range of choices and materials presented here is an example of UDL in practice. I've provided multiple means of engagement and multiple means of representation for you to choose from based on your own preferences, needs, and interests to access on your own time. Thanks so much for participating in this module on Universal Design for Learning in the Inclusive Classroom, the representation principle.